So in this video, as of course the title suggests, I'm going to do my overarching review of the entire World War II Zombies season. Obviously now that we've played every single map and we've completed every single Easter egg this season has to offer and really went over all the story that we possibly can, I think we're at a good time to finally do a full review of the World War II Zombies season and just tell you how I personally felt about this. Now, most of the things I'm going to be talking about in here are going to be objective things, but there are some personal or I guess opinion-based things that I will be also mentioning inside this video. But of course, you guys will notice when that happens because you can tell obviously from what is opinion-based and then what is not and just objectively wrong. Now, there are some things that I want to mention right away because as all of us know that the World War II Zombies team did not have the manpower it needed, and I understand that, and that's the reason why it has so many problems. But the problem is I can't overlook the problems that it had. I'm still going to bring those up, even though I'm aware of the reason why these problems exist. I'm aware their team was really small, like a team of 8, and they only had I'm not too sure about their budget, but they didn't have much really going for them to even make this successful in the first place. But even with that said, I'm going to make a full review of this and not hold back anything at all because the fact it was only 8 or so people working on zombies this year. I still am going to treat it like any other zombies mode because really when it comes down to it, they're a AAA developer, and whether it's just the people in the top or whoever it may be, it's still their fault for it turning out like this. It's not something you can overlook. But anyways, with all that said, let's actually get into this. So I'm going to start with the good because, I mean, there's not much of it to say the very least, at least from what I can really look at. But the first thing I want to talk about is the environment that the game sets throughout every single map. And I think this is done really well, especially in our first map, the Final Reich, and our second map, of course, that being the Shadowed Throne. And I mean, the other two were okay, or excuse me, third map when I said second map because, you know, DLC 2, you're confusing stuff. But regardless, and then I think the Frozen Dawn did it well. But of course, I don't think that these names are kind of confusing for me, but the Darkest Shore was a bad for its environment. It just wasn't as good as the other ones, but it still was good in its own right. I mean, the Tortured Path was okay for its environment. It wasn't that well, and of course I should do a little explaining what I mean by environment. That's just the like what you see, what you hear, and how they connect to each other. Like especially a really good example is inside the I'm going to think of the name here. The names, I don't know why I get them confused. They're not even the same names. They all start with the, and because of that I get them all confused. But regardless, inside the Shadowed Throne, that's what it's called, when you walk around that map you can hear people crying in the distance, people yelling for help, and just a lot of things like that that just make it really unsettling. And it kind of really captures that feel of this destroyed city that not too long ago it was just a normal city and now it's destroyed because of war. And that was a really cool environment, and just how they did it was really well. Another one is a really good example is Middleburg, or I guess not Middleburg, but that's the area it's located in. But of course, the Final Reich, where you go to the underground area inside the bunkers, especially inside the two, I don't know what to call them, where they branch off from the main area. I guess you could say it's the laboratory, and there's a name for them. I can't remember the two names, but they have a really good environment. Just trust me, they're really good, and that's probably one of their better things. I don't think it's what they did best out of everything, even though it's one of them, but it is something they did really well. But the next thing I want to talk about is actually what they did better than I've ever seen before, and that is the melee weapons. Melee weapons, they blew it out of the park with the melee weapons. They were so good, they were just fun to use, and they were not trash, which is something is so hard to find with melee weapons in zombies. I think the only other successful melee weapon that's ever existed in zombies is probably Shell and Shuffle with the nunchucks and katana, but really those weren't all that much of a melee weapons because the reason you liked using, well, I guess the nunchucks were, but the katana is more like you shoot things at them, so I wouldn't really include that. So the only good melee weapon before this that we ever got were nunchucks, and I mean, all of them that they put in here were really, really well done, excluding the shovel, but the shovel's not supposed to be good, so we can't really bring that in. But regardless, I mean, every single wonder weapon in that game is just so good. You go to the bat, you go to the knife, they're all good, they're all viable to use. You even have Barbarossa's blade. This isn't his sword, of course. That actually turned out to be good. It wasn't originally good, but then they buffed in all that good stuff, so I will say it's good now. But really, every single melee weapon that we ever got inside this entire thing was good. The Frozen Dawn guns, the Tortured Path, the Barbarossa sword, and then of course the melee weapons inside the Shadowed Throne. They were all just really, really good and well executed. I think they did exactly what they were supposed to do. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is just giving them credit for trying to change up the zombies formula with the Tortured Path. Now, we'll go over the execution of it later, but just being willing to change up the formula and not work how zombies has always worked. I mean, the zombies formula that we've been following has been the exact same formula for 10 years, and for them to finally go out and try to change it up, I am very grateful for. I think it was something that zombies needed, and I really wish that it was something that they would have started from the very start, where they had like more room to work with it and experiment with it, where people could tell, hey, this is Treyarch's, no, not Treyarch, this is Sledgehammer Zombies, not Treyarch's, and they could distinguish themselves from Treyarch and just making the zombies game play different. I mean, generally it plays the same, but it's still different. Like, you could tell the Tortured Path, plays a lot different compared to all the other ones. And honestly, I think Tortured Path would have worked way better for the type of story they were telling, which is something I'll get into later in the video. But for the story they were telling, Tortured Path's formula would have been so much better. And I honestly believe if this was their first map, like if they designed their entire season to be like this, it would have been so much better, because with their first map they would have had so much more time to work with it compared to a DLC. I mean, you have 3 years compared to whatever you have for a DLC. I just know it's not 3 years. And on top of that, it's just like, even if it wasn't great right away, you still have the DLCs to figure out exactly how to make it work. And that's just my personal thoughts on the Tortured Paths of how it really changed up zombies. But of course, I'm not done with it. I'll come back to it, unfortunately, in the bad side of this. And the last thing I wanted to mention, and this is probably the last small thing, even though I didn't personally go do these, but I think this was a good thing, adding in the secret characters. Now, it's not all good, because I do think some of the missions or challenges or whatever you want to call them to get them, they were just a little ridiculous if you ask me. I mean, I just don't like some of them, but again, that's why they're challenges and secret characters and all that stuff. Other thing I don't like about them is that if you're playing in a group of people, and especially if someone like my good self wants to hear the conversation quotes, which is another thing we'll have to get into later. But of course, if someone's playing as one of the special secret characters, then you won't be able to hear the character conversation quotes at all. Even if you have 3 out of the 4 people playing as normal characters and just that one guy is a special character, you won't hear any storyline quotes at all. In fact, everybody's just silent. But of course, that's a different problem for a different time. But regardless, I think as a whole, at least what the secret characters did for, I think it was just better. I mean, honestly, think what people were doing about it. For the small audience that World War II Zombies had, what were they going for? They were going for the secret characters, and that's why I see them as a good thing, because they were like probably the only thing that kept these World War II Zombies maps still being played after the Easter egg was completed, because I guess I couldn't see really anybody else playing for any other reason. So that's why I say the secret characters are probably a really good thing for it. Now, unfortunately, that's where it comes to end for the good things about World War II Zombies season. Now, I'm just going to say right away, there's much more bad on my list than good for this. And because of that, I'm not going to go over every single thing and why I thought that was the case, because I think some of them are quite obvious. But I'll go over the ones I think I need to go over fast, and the other ones I feel like I need to expand on, I will do so. So anyways, let's jump into the bad about World War II Zombies season. First thing I want to go over, cutscenes. Every single one of them is awful. I don't think most people will argue against that, so not going to spend much time on that one. Another thing I want to talk about is the Easter eggs, excluding, what's that map called? The Frozen Dawn. They were just not solo friendly, and they were not fun to do solo player, and that is ridiculous. You are just leaving out a huge player base, or a huge portion of your player base out, and just because they don't want to play with people, or they can't find other people to play with, you're going to not let them have a fun time doing the Easter eggs, and instead, when they're trying to do the Easter eggs, they have to be sweating their minds out. Like, it was just a dumb decision, no matter how I look at it. No matter if they tell me it was purposely done or not, it was just a dumb decision. Especially, it's even worse if it was done consciously, if you ask me. It's just like, are you stupid? I don't know. That's just the one thing that gets me so angry angry about it. Probably the biggest problem with this more than anything. But regardless, the other thing I want to talk about is that every single boss fight, excluding the Panzer Mortar, was a bullet sponge. Like, what? Every single one? Like, honestly, you look at every single boss we ever faced inside every DLC map was a bullet sponge. It's just ridiculous. And then they thought for their final map, let's do something crazy and let's make this bullet sponge even bigger, like the biggest bullet sponge we've ever made, except now he got his shield. It's like, what? And even for the Panzer Mortar that wasn't a bullet sponge, it was still a poor boss fight. I mean, just boss fights as a whole was just not good here. It's just, they weren't good, to say the very least. The boss fights inside World War II Zombies, I don't think most people will say that they were good in the slightest. They just weren't good, and they were mainly bullet sponges. But anyways, the next thing I want to talk about is that every single DLC map was a super small map. They were all so small. I don't like it. It just wasn't good, because you think about every single map. The, what's it called? The first one, the Darkest Shore, that's what it's called. These names, I don't know why they are so hard for me to say. They're just ridiculous. But regardless, I mean, small map. Then even though I liked the map, it was still a small map. Of course, that being the next map after that, the Shadowed Throne. Small map again, just had the, the underground area, the upper area splits off to two areas. It's just a box pretty much with one area leading off of it. Or I guess two, because there's that other area. There's also the blimp, but it's still a pretty small map. Then after that, you have the Tortured Path, which is 3 even smaller maps put together. So, I mean, there's still small maps. And then after that, you had yourself our most recent map, the Frozen Dawn, which was just a ring with the 3 lines coming off of it, which is all it was, all very small maps. And again, I'm aware, I mentioned this earlier in the video, but I feel like I should mention it again. Yes, I'm aware their team was very limited, but that's not my fault. It still was a problem if you have every single one of your maps small. It's just not going to be a good thing. I'm just saying, no matter what, I don't care. It's not my fault. It's their fault. Even if it wasn't their fault, the Zombies team's fault directly, it was still someone at the top, which still lays the fault on the studio itself. So I'm just saying that right away. But regardless, I do still think it was quite ridiculous that every single DLC map was quite small. I just didn't like it at all. They were all very small maps. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the same exact soundtrack through every single map. Every single map had the exact same soundtrack. What the heck is that? Like, I think about it, especially if you think about this has not been a thing since, like, I don't think they've ever had the same soundtrack for every single Zombies map in a season. Even back in World at War, they didn't. They actually didn't have the same soundtrack. Of course, back then there was a lack of soundtrack, but even you look back to Black Ops, different soundtrack for every single map. Black Ops 2, different soundtrack for every map. I think that one did it better than any other Zombies game ever, Black Ops 2. But then you have Black Ops 3, definitely new soundtracks for every single Zombies map. It's just, you get new round changes, you get new music for the spawn, new music for everything else. It's just something that is just supposed to happen in Zombies, and they didn't do it. They just kept the same soundtrack throughout the entire thing. You just hear da 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 da. That's all you heard the entire season. I'm actually disgusted with the song. I mean, I thought it was a cool song back when it got leaked last year, but it's just not a good song anymore. It's just bad. No matter how many times, I mean, because of how many times I listened to it, it's just not good anymore. And that's just a major problem with it. Like, how many times you actually heard I don't know. But anyways, the next thing I want to mention is that there was a lack of new perks. Don't really need to expand on that because there just wasn't any perks in that. New perks, I should say. You had the same 5 perks through the entire season, or was it 6? Don't know. Well, it's one of the two. I think it's 6 actually, but still you had the same 6 perks throughout the entire season, and because of that, you just use the exact same perks every single game because you weren't really using the melee perk or the electric cherry perk at all. You're just using the other ones. I do see also that there's a problem with the lack of Easter egg rewards, both when you complete just a single Easter egg alone and when you complete all 4 of the Easter eggs. So for the Easter eggs alone, all you got were all the perks in the game. Like I said, there was a lack of perks in this game, especially if you compare that to Black Ops 3 and the Infinite Warfare. I mean, Infinite Warfare, well, let's start with Black Ops 3. Black Ops 3 had 9 perks in the season, and then Infinite Warfare had 12 perks or more than that. I'm not exactly sure. There were a ton of perks in Infinite Warfare. So, I mean, the reward really felt like it was lacking where you only got 6 perks. It was just like, oh, I got 6 perks for completing that Easter egg. That's amazing. I mean, it just felt like the rewards for doing any given Easter egg was lacking. And then when you actually did all the Easter eggs, I mean, you got the secret character, which was a zombie, and now you can spawn in with the most, a lot of different guns, but really you're just going to use the sap again. Doesn't really matter. So, I mean, Easter egg rewards, no matter how you look at them, they were just bad all around the place, if you ask me. They just were not good. Other one I want to mention, the lack of super Easter eggs. I mean, I know they don't have to do this, but it just felt like something that I thought it should have happened, but I don't know. It's not something I'm going to complain too much about, but I felt like it should have been there. And honestly, I thought Super Easter Egg would have been so helpful, especially to make up for the maps not being solo friendly. This could have been their really good opportunity to change that and say, oh, now if you complete all the Easter eggs, now they're going to be really easy now, and you could do it when you are solo, co-op, it doesn't matter. It's just going to be easy now, like they did with Director's Cut. But that wasn't the case, and that just wasn't the case. But anyways, next thing I want to talk about is most of the Wonder Weapons were bad. They just were. Nobody can really argue against that. I mean, you had the Wonder Bus, awful. You had the Ripsaw, awful. You had the Tesla guns. I mean, the Reaper was good, but it was ridiculous to get, so it kind of offset itself for being good, and the rest of them weren't good. Moon Knight wasn't good, or Moonlight, I forget the name of them, but regardless, most of them weren't good, except, I guess the red one was pretty good, but regardless, most of them were not good throughout the season, except for the Wonder Weapons in, of course, none other than our last map, the Frozen Dawn, and maybe the Reaper. That's all I could really say. All the other ones were pretty bad. Maybe you could say Barbarossa's sword was good. I think it's good now that it's after the patch, but still, it's just, I felt like their Wonder Weapons really felt like, that's what I'm saying, like the melee weapons, they don't feel like Wonder Weapons for me, and those were the only things that were good. So all the Wonder Weapons that we got were kind of underwhelming, if you ask me to say the very least about it. Other thing I don't like, and this is sticking to weapons, is that the sap was the most powerful weapon inside this game. Why is the sap the most powerful weapon? Like, even if you include the Wonder Weapon or the melee weapons that I liked, still, the sap is the best gun in the game. It just is. There's no arguing about it. The sap is the best gun. And that's your starting pistol. Like, why is this a thing? I'm not saying they should have nerfed it. I just think the Wonder Weapons should have been so much better. Like, the Wonder Weapons really felt like they had something to be desired. Like, they were just lacking the Wonder Weapons, to say the absolute least. But anyways, the other thing I want to mention is that there's a lack of double pack punch. I know, kind of dumb, but whatever. Other thing I want to mention real quick is just these ones to get out of the way right away. That we had the exact same quotes for every single game. You had, now we're cooking with gas, now we're cooking with gas. And not only was it by this exact, like, not only did the same character say the exact same quote over and over again, but every single character had that quote. Every single time they bought a wall weapon. You had Jefferson saying, now we're cooking with gas. You had Olivia saying, now we're cooking with gas. You had Jefferson, now we're cooking with gas. You had Olivia, now we're cooking with gas. They're all saying the exact same thing. Like, what the heck was that? Honestly, who thought that was a good idea? I mean, I just have no idea. Like, whatever, but sticking to the quotes, I want to talk about how the conversational quotes were handled. First off, they were ridiculous to get, even if you had access to the in-game files. They were so hard to put together, and I only did it once because that's how much work it took. So it's just was not worth it in the end. And the problem with it is that they were so hard to hear in game. Also, you had to have all 4 characters in your game. You had to hope no one was using a special character. It was just something that I did not like. I did not like how conversational quotes worked in this game. They were pretty much exactly what they did with Infinite Warfare Zombies. They had to have all 4 characters in there, and I bet you guys, you didn't even know that Infinite Warfare Zombies had conversational quotes. Yes, they did, but they were just as bad, if not worse, than World War II. They were just so difficult. They should really just stick to how Black Ops 3 did conversational quotes, where you had 2 characters talking to each other and not 3 or 4-way conversations that you have to try to figure out what's going on here, because it's much easier to put together a 2-way conversation than anything else. And I mean, I don't know why they did that, but regardless, it's just pretty dumb. Now, a little nitpick right here is that you had the exact same zombie models, just a Nazi zombie model throughout the entire season. I mean, that wouldn't have been a problem if you released it back in Black Ops or World War II, but even back in Black Ops 2, there was a different zombie model for every single map. Like, think about it. Every single map had a different zombie model. Like, you had the whole patient zombies, like some patients, of course, in that the thing you wear when you go to the doctors for a long extended period of time. You had them looking different in transit. To Die-Rise, they look different. Definitely in Mob of the Dead, they look different. Buried, they look different. And Origins, they definitely, again, look different. And I just don't like that we kept the same exact zombie models through the entire season. It's just kind of dumb. Now, the next thing I want to just say, Whistlings, they're bad. They're just bad. No more to say there. And two more things I want to say real quick is that, first, Tortured Path, poorly executed. I think it would have been better, I've already gone over this, if they just stuck to this model from the very start. They should have just changed how they played, or just stuck to the Tortured Path model from the very start. They should have never reused Treyarch's thing, because I think they would have been much more successful if they changed up the zombies formula to this formula more. And also, I think it would have benefited the story. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the story and the characters. Now, I think most people can agree that the characters were bad. I don't think most people will say, yeah, Jefferson, I really like that guy. I mean, he was okay, but I mean, I guess you can't say they're bad. I won't say they're bad, but they weren't good. They weren't memorable. They weren't anything that stood out to me, because what stands out to me is Richtofen and him saying ridiculous things. Like, when you hear that Origins quote, it's all like, there's so much to do. The vessel for Maxis, the opening of the gateway, and you just hear that, and it's just like, you could tell, like, that's something you only hear from Richtofen. But what's actually unique about these characters? Like, actually, I can't think of anything special about these characters. I really feel like characters were just not the strong suit here at all. I just feel like it just felt like something was really left to be desired with every single character. I mean, people were saying that Jefferson had a character. I think he was the worst out of all of them. I mean, people were saying that something happened with him inside the Tortured Path, but I've never seen that. But of course, after that, Drosten, he was probably my favorite just because of who his actor was. I mean, he's a pretty good actor, and I think he did a good job at voice acting Drosten, but still, it's just like, it still wasn't the best character at all. Marie was probably the second worst character. Olivia, she was fine. I mean, she was there. That's all I'll say. But I just think characters were poorly done. But for the story as itself, and I didn't know where to include this, because I know that the story isn't a bad story. I could tell that. I've watched Reed's video. I've heard everyone's opinion on the story. I've watched and heard people actually like the story. But no matter how I looked at this story, and this is coming from someone who really tried to like the story. I actually did. You go back to DLC 1 and DLC 2, it probably stopped at DLC 3 is where I just couldn't with the story anymore. I just couldn't make myself like the story at all. And it just wasn't my type of story. That's what it is. And I'm not going to say the story's bad, so don't think this is in the bad category anymore. The story was just not for me personally. I think the story was just not done in a way that a person like me would enjoy it, because I really like, especially in my zombies games, just a story that you have to figure out what's going on, or you have that opportunity to at least try to figure out what's going on. Like, one thing that I think is a pretty good example, and I know this is something that's really hard to reach, but the blood vials are actually something very interesting. They're introduced in Origins. Never really mentioned though, they're just there. And then you have more things mentioned about them, things are like kind of smoothly introduced, and you have to guess, wait, what's that doing there? Wait, there's something going on there. Wait, why does it have the numbers on it? What, those are Finn and Cell's blood vials? I mean, numbers. So are they his blood vials? And you're just trying to figure out what's going on, and then they become important later on. And I really like that. Again, the children weren't done well because they were just, and actually the children were done well because they were just throwing them there. We're like, wait, who? What? I mean, they were actually done poorly because a lot of people missed what they were doing with it. But regardless, it's just like how they slowly introduce things. Like, they're not important at that moment, but they'll become important. That's what I love about Treyarch Zombies. That they're not like most stories, because most stories are told like World War II Zombies. They're just there, and that's important. You have to figure out that's important, or that's there now. It's just like, it becomes important immediately. Like, something's introduced, and that is right away is important right away. Unlike how it's done in Treyarch Zombie story, and that's, I know everybody's not going to tell the story exactly like Treyarch. Obviously, that would be a bad thing. But I just feel like for a zombies mode, I mean, it just feels like it has to be that way, for me at least. And that's the reason why I don't like this storyline. In fact, I would go out and say that I wouldn't say that it's a better story, but I would say I liked how the story was handled in Infinite Warfare better than how they handled the story inside World War II. Now, of course, Infinite Warfare didn't have the best story, but it was one of interest, and I think they really did most characters. I mean, the playable characters, they were fine, but Willard Wyler was a very interesting character, and he really caught my attention in that. And I mean, I just think that they handled it better. It just wasn't in your face. It wasn't something that was just in your way. But of course, we're not talking about Infinite Warfare Zombies right now. We're just talking about World War II Zombies. But anyways, recording cut off there, so I had to cut back right here real quick. But regardless, what I was saying about the story wasn't my story. So I mean, that's all I'll really say about it. But anyways, as you guys can tell, I had a lot of bad to say and not that much good to say. So you can already tell where my opinion lies with this storyline or this season. So obviously, as you guys probably know, I judge a game or a zombies game at the very least by 3 things: gameplay, Easter eggs, and of course story. I mean, the story, like I just finished saying, it wasn't a story for my liking. It was just not a story that I feel was a good story for zombies, at least to be told inside this zombies mode. That's why I said it would have been much more better if they told this story in the tortured path method. It's something like that. But regardless, did not like the story personally. It's a fine story, but it's just not my story. Then after that, for Easter eggs, again, I think they were bullet sponges and not solo friendly. So 2 negatives right away. And then for the general gameplay, the lack of more perks. I mean, you had 6 perks. All the maps were quite small. And I just don't know. Honestly, I'm going to be completely honest. World War II just didn't cut it for any of those 3. At least Infinite Warfare did it for 2. But this one was just like not with any of them. Like, there's nothing I could say is really well done except melee weapons. Honestly, I'm being completely honest. I'm not trying to hate on this, but the only thing that I think was done to a really well, like, top-notch level was melee weapons. I'm going to be completely honest. That's honestly how I feel about World War II Zombies. I just think it was our second to worst zombies mode that we have ever got. The only one worse than it is Exo Zombies for me. Honestly, I wanted to like it. I really did. I thought that they were going in the right direction, being a World War II Nazi zombie evil stuff, but it just didn't turn out that way for me. It just wasn't what I wanted it to be, and that's just because, I mean, it just wasn't what I was expecting and what I wanted, and that's all I can really say about it. But anyways, again, this isn't to hate on World War II. I know there's reasons why so many of these problems existed because of the team being so small. But again, I can't ignore that when I'm judging the map and just telling you what I think about it, in my opinion of it, because regardless of what the reasons for why it ended up this way, it still ended up this way, and that's the product I received, and I was a little disappointed to say the very least. But anyways, that's about it for me. If you guys did enjoy the video, actually before that, I would just want to say, just go ahead and tell me what you guys think about this. Do you guys agree, disagree with me? I'd love to hear what you guys think about it, because I know a good amount of people actually liked World War II Zombies, and I want to really hear why you guys liked it so much. Like, I don't know. It just didn't do it for me in most areas, if any areas, but regardless, I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about it all in the comments. Again, I'm not trying to hate you. I don't want you guys to go down in the comments and agree with me in a hateful manner towards World War II, but still, it's just, I don't know, it just didn't do it for me in so many ways. But anyways, that's about it for me. If you guys did enjoy the video, go ahead, do all the normal YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, bell, share, and especially bell. But I'm gonna go, and I'll catch you guys in the next stream or video.